Hello, my name is Donnie Bates, and I am the Academic Dean of the Bear Valley Bible Institute located in Denver, Colorado. This is the first of a series of videos that we're producing that will provide our students with some guidance on the subject of writing. It is our hope that by having this material on video, our students will be able to go back and access this information whenever necessary as they work on their writing assignments. The videos will cover such subjects as the writing process, common methods of development, planning a research paper, grammar and its usage, MLA rules, and using library resources. This first video is entitled The Writing Process. Some people find writing easy. Most people, however, find that writing is hard work. But writing is also an opportunity. It allows you to express something of yourself, to explore and explain ideas. By formulating and organizing ideas and finding the right words to present them, you gain power. At its heart, writing is about communication. At times, the task may seem overwhelming, but the rewards make the hard work worthwhile. As you come to see writing positively as an opportunity for communication, you will develop the confidence you need to overcome its occasional frustrations. I want to begin this particular video on the writing process by giving you some pointers for writers that actually come from or came from Ernest Hemingway. Number one, develop writing habits that work for you and trust in them. Number two, understand the stages of the writing process. And number three, rely on three basic elements to guide you, whatever your writing task is. Your writing task may be writing a bulletin article. Your writing task may be writing a sermon outline. It may be writing a scholarly article for some brotherhood publication. Whatever your task is, even if it's just writing for yourself, for future study, reference, or in answering a question that a brother or sister in Christ in the congregation where you serve has asked, bear in mind these three basic elements and let them guide you in your process. The first of those is the subject. You've got to keep in mind the subject. We're going to learn in this writing process that is so important to maintain the idea that there's just one subject for this writing project. You're going to learn very similar ideas in your classes at Bear Valley on homiletics, learning how to develop and build sermons and then deliver those sermons. And remember, there's just one subject in each individual lesson or sermon, and the same is true in a writing project. So the writing process will help you maintain your writing on just that one subject so that you're not just all over the place and losing your readers. The second element that you should remember is your audience. You're going to write differently if you are writing, for example, material to be taught to elementary age children than you would for high school age students or adults. Remember your audience. If you are writing for a primarily Christian audience, you will present the material one way. And if you are writing for a more secular audience, you will use different terminology. I don't mean to say that you will be subversive in one and not the other, but it is vitally important that you remember your audience to whom you are writing. And then the third element is the purpose of your writing. Why are you writing this? If you are writing to answer a question that someone in the congregation has asked you, remember that purpose and answer the question. It may be a situation where you recognize that the person asking the question did not fully communicate or adequately communicate what he or she was trying to communicate about the question. Answer the question. Answer the question that this person has in his or her mind. If the purpose of your article is to address a doctrinal issue that you've been asked to address in a Brotherhood publication, remember your purpose. Answer the question. Address the doctrinal um, issue that is in play here. Keep that purpose in mind. So again, you're not all over the place. Oh, that reminds me of a story, or that reminds me of another issue that comes up. Save that issue for another writing project. There's also the stages of the writing process that we're going to develop in this particular video. The first stage is the planning stage. This is a series of strategies to find and formulate information in writing. That's the planning stage. What do you want to write about? Now, again, if you've been asked a question, you've been asked to write a scholarly article, then that question is pretty much answered already. If you're writing bulletin articles or sermon outlines or some other kind of writing project, an essay that you want to write, and we're going to talk a little bit later about using blogs or writing script for podcasts and things such as that. What is it that you want to write about? And so there's the planning stage, a series of strategies designed to find and formulate information in writing. Planning will also include your research and how you want to go about your research or where you want to do your research. There's so much available online now, although you have to be very careful about using online resources. You've got to know what those resources are and be able to, understand and communicate the authority of these resources. There are so many things on the World Wide Web that simply are not authoritative. Anybody can write anything and post it on the internet. And so you have to be very careful with that. But there are a lot of great resources there. But if you have limited capability with your internet access, you want to use hard copy resources, you want to go to a library. Well, I can remember in ministry when I was working on my master's degree and I was writing some rather involved research papers. The closest religious library to me was about 200 miles away. And so I would have to plan very carefully if I was going to use the resources in those libraries. I couldn't just call the wife and say, well, I'm going to run down to the library for the next couple of hours. You couldn't do that. So planning involves all of that. The next stage that we will talk about is drafting. And by drafting, we mean a series of strategies designed to organize and develop a sustained piece of writing. Drafting involves writing outlines, writing copies of what it is that you're wanting to develop, drafts, as we call them. You've got an original draft, you've got an outline draft, and there will eventually be a final draft, but that's what we refer to when we mean drafting. The third step is called revising. Revising is a series of strategies designed to re-examine and reevaluate the choices that have created a piece of writing. When you sit down to compose your original draft, the roughest of your rough drafts, the best way to do that is to just write. Now, you've done research and you're wanting to incorporate that research, but the writing is yours. The sources that you quote, the citations that you have, in your writing project may come from other authorities and will help you greatly in the project and in your research and understanding a particular subject and helping your readers to understand that subject. But the writing itself comes from you, and so you write. But as you review what you have written and you proofread, you're going to find mistakes. That's why proofreading is so vitally important. I typically give the advice to my students in class on any writing project. 3 very important things you must do with a writing project: proofread, proofread, proofread. And then, if you have time and availability, get someone else to proofread. It's so important to put together a quality piece of writing material. But as you are reviewing this, you are revising, and you will discover that there are concepts, there are actual words, terminology that you use that you will understand and realize, I think I should say this a little bit differently. And because I want to put the work in to produce a quality product. If we are to remember that our primary goal in writing is communication, then we're going to want to put the best product out there that we possibly can, and that requires work. Now, I understand, and all of the staff at Bear Valley understand, that when we're talking about assignments, and you have multiple assignments in a quarter, writing assignments, I mean. You may have a research paper to write in a class for me. You may have a research paper to write in a class for another instructor in the same quarter, and maybe have the same similar or exact due dates. I understand that there is less time for revising than there would be if you are a novelist and this is all you do, and you've got the next year, let's say, to produce a novel. You're going to have more time to be able to sit down and revise. You've got to keep those deadlines in your mind. And of course, at school here, those deadlines are due dates. Well, I understand that. But if you will manage your time well, get started on your writing projects early, like immediately, starting with your research and such like, you will have time to do adequate revision and uh, research and reevaluation, reexamination. That's the terminology that I was trying to come up with there, to be able to produce the product that you want to. And I hope that you will want to, not just for a grade. I hope that you will learn to love writing. You may not everyone does. It is necessary if in ministry that you write. At the very least, you're going to need to write sermon outlines. You most likely will have to write bulletin articles. If you will give yourself to it, you may find that you like writing in other areas as well. And it is, as we've already noted, it is a great way to express yourself with the ideas that you have floating around in your head. And so the fourth stage of the writing process is designing. Now, designing is a series of strategies used to organize and display the choices that distinguish your completed project. Now, some projects that you write might require a physical design element that makes your product stand out. It might be, and this may seem trivial, but it might be that the writing project you have in mind is a resume. You want your resume to stand out. You want to distinguish that. And so when it comes to designing, how do you want that to look? How do you want on any writing project? Let's go with bulletin articles. How do you want that bulletin article to look? Do you want it to look professional? Do you want to use a font like Times New Roman? Times New Roman, by the way, is the font that almost all of your assignments are required to be written in here at Bear Valley. Times New Roman is a very easy to read font for printed material. Now, when you are talking about projected material as the text you would find in a PowerPoint presentation, like if you were to, and you will have a class here at Bear Valley on research strategy, or rather, well, now the name of the class has escaped me, but you'll have a class where you will learn to use some of the technology that ministry technologies. I knew I would, if I talked long enough, I would remember it. But in ministry technologies, you will learn how to use the Logos software that we are requiring you to purchase when you come to school here. But you'll also learn a little bit about, and I don't know the instructor for that, Michael Height. I don't know how he has organized that class. I know it changes a little bit every year, but he typically has a little bit to say about how to put together PowerPoint presentations. I'm only concerned with the text part of that. You probably would want to use a font that is different than Times New Roman, but Times New Roman is the preferred font for printed text. But if you're writing a bulletin article, there might be a reason why you want to write in a different font for a different reason. Perhaps it is to talk about the upcoming Vacation Bible School or the upcoming event for a younger audience. There's all kinds of things to think about when it comes to design. Font size, presentations in this. If you are talking about a writing project where if you are, now in our master's program here at Bear Valley, we do not require you to write a master's thesis. However, you may decide to pursue a graduate degree in another institution after your time here at Bear Valley, and you may be required to write a master's thesis or even a doctoral dissertation. And you are going to find that in the presentation of that writing assignment, there's more to consider, not just the font and font size, but the paper, the brightness of the paper, the quality of the paper. Typically, in those kinds of scholarly works, institutions of higher learning will require the highest quality paper. It's not just what you get when you go down to Office Depot, and buy a ream of paper for your copier. It's more involved than that. So designing is a series of strategies used to organize and display the choices that distinguish your completed project. All right, let's move to the next point, working within the writing process. Do not think of these 4 stages of the writing process that we just covered: planning, drafting, revising, and designing. Do not think of those 4 stages as a linear process. You do your planning, and then you do your drafting, and then you do your revising, and then you do your designing, and then you're done. No, it is not that. It is not a process where you complete all of the activities of stage 1 before moving to stage 2, etc., etc. Writing is a complex mental activity that usually unfolds as a more flexible and recursive sequence of tasks. You're going to find, after going through the planning, and you've done all the planning, you know the plan of action that you have for writing out this project, and so you begin the drafting process and you write a draft, your initial rough draft. And then in doing that, you think about something that you've didn't think about in your planning process. Oh, there's something else I need to do. You know, there's some other resources that I've just become aware of. There's any number of things that can happen, and so I need to go back and do some more planning, and maybe it's planning on the fly. I'm working on this rough draft, and I think about some of these things, and so I go while I'm working on this draft, I lay the pencil down if we were still writing it that way and go to this other source that I didn't have in my initial planning process. Or I need to remember to go and check this other source of sources. I forgot about this area on the internet, or I forgot about these library resources. I've got a preacher friend down the road. I forgot about the fact that I saw a book that I can't find on his shelf one day. Or I'll just call him. I didn't even think to call him. And so it's recursive in that sense. You're going to go back and forth as you work on these different tasks. There's in working within the writing process involves making decisions in the writing process. You're going to discover as you write that you are constantly making decisions. This seemed like a really good point to make here. And as you're doing some of your one of the drafts that you will do early on is called a discovery draft, and you're just writing, incorporating maybe some of the research also, but you're just writing and you're discovering how this flows together. And you may have come up in your planning process initially with a point that seemed really good. But when you put it together with all of the other points that you're making, it really doesn't fit. It's not wrong, it's not incorrect, but now this point does not seem to support the message that I'm trying to communicate with this point. This is something maybe I put aside for another writing project and develop it some way. This happens all the time when you are creating sermon material. But it's the same is true when you're writing articles. And if you become a prolific writer, I hope that you will. The Brotherhood needs more prolific writers who are good at their craft. And that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish with this material. But making decisions. You're going to be making decisions constantly. Some of those decisions are complex, like when you're trying to shape ideas that you have. Other decisions are simple. You're trying to select the right word. I really encourage you to make friends with a thesaurus, whether it's an online thesaurus or Roget's hard copy thesaurus that you keep on your book. I personally have worn out some books like that. I have, well, I don't think I have it anymore, but I actually wore out a dictionary. It took me a lot of time. It took me several years, as a matter of fact. But use these kinds of things. Find some kind of a book that will help you with synonyms, and a thesaurus will help you with that. But that's a decision that you make. Each decision, though, whether large or small, complex or simple, affects every other decision that you make, so that you are constantly adjusting and readjusting your writing to make sure that it is consistent, that it is coherent, and that it is clear. And I mentioned a little bit ago that writing is all about communication. That is the key, what would we say, purpose, or the most important thing we want to accomplish with our writing is to communicate. And it doesn't matter if we're preaching or we are writing, communication is key. If I were the greatest preacher that ever lived, if I were the greatest writer that ever lived, and yet I preached or wrote in a language no one could understand, or I used terminology that was not easily understandable by my readers, it's worthless. And think about what the Apostle Paul said at the beginning of 1 Corinthians chapter 13 about having all of this great ability, but if I don't have love, none of it matters. Well, it's kind of that way with preaching and writing. You can have all of the greatest ideas. You can have the absolute truth that will set men free. But if you cannot communicate that truth, it's not done anyone any good. And so it's communication is what we are about as we do what we do in ministry. But now, the most effective or maybe the most important part of communication is clarity. Clarity. And I just said that every decision that you make, no matter how important or unimportant it may seem, or however large, small, complex, simple that it is, make sure that, or these decisions help you make sure that you are continuously adjusting and readjusting to make your writing consistent about one thing, coherent and clear. Clarity. Here's the problem. You have to learn in your writing, if you're writing for other people, bulletin articles, whatever the situation is, you're writing for other people, you've got a point you want to make. You have to convince your readers that you want them to read all that you've written, to understand the point that you're trying to make. But readers, I'm just going to tell you this bluntly, readers are lazy. I know there are exceptions to this. There are some people that just, they cannot get enough information. They read everything they can get their hands on because they want to learn. And I love those kinds of people. God bless those kinds of people. But most readers that you're writing for are going to be lazy. And I'm going to tell you this, as one of your instructors who will be reading some of the things that you write, I'm lazy. I read a lot. And I try very hard to make it my responsibility to read every word that you write. Now, my laziness as a reader, I can't bring into play when I'm reading an assignment. I've just got to overcome that. And if your writing is boring me, I'm just going to have to be bored because I have to read your assignment and grade it. But if I'm reading your writing project as someone who picked up a bulletin article, or picked up a bulletin and I'm reading your article, or I picked up a copy of the latest Gospel Advocate issue or some other Brotherhood publication, and I see your name at the bottom of of an article, I know him. I'm going to read that. Well, I don't have to read that. And if you don't keep my attention, my laziness is going to say, okay, I got other things I can be doing right now. And clarity, or the lack of clarity, is one of the things that will make me put your project down, your article down, because you lost me. Maybe you went off on a tangent somewhere, and I understood that that's not what I thought we were talking about. Or you used terminology that I didn't understand. We have to keep those things in mind. And so, decisions. Do you use a word that sounds really smart? Or do you use a word that means the same thing that's very easy to understand? That's a decision that we're talking about, the kind of decision. In every writing situation, a writer is trying to communicate. Remember those three elements that Hemingway suggested we keep in mind? We need to understand that the writer, and that's you or that's me, is trying to communicate a subject to an audience for a purpose. That's what we're talking about. Whatever it is that you write, you're trying to communicate a subject to an audience for a purpose. And if you keep that in mind, it will help you immensely in your writing process, in the projects that you write. These three guidelines are elements are your guidelines as you work through the process of writing. They help you remain focused. Let's talk about, now we're still talking about working within the writing process. Let's talk about selecting your subject. How do you select a subject? Now, for students, this may seem like an unnecessary step, or maybe it seems like an easy step because, after all, the instructors usually give you your writing assignments. Now, sometimes you are going to be assigned a writing project. Maybe it's an essay, maybe it's a research paper, maybe it's a sermon outline or a bulletin article. And you're going to be given a list of topics from which to choose. Well, how do you decide within that list? But once you get out into your ministry and you don't have instructors giving you these kinds of assignments, how do you decide what you want to write about? I'll tell you that in my ministry, I learned this from someone else. Another preacher friend of mine was doing this. But just in the area of sermons upcoming, usually around the 1st of December every year, I would start a list. I would dedicate however much time I needed, and I would sit down and I would make a list of 100, I call them CIs, the initials CI. The CI, some people will call this your thesis statement. Some people call it the big idea. But this CI is the one subject that I'm going to be preaching about. And I would typically write or preach a minimum of 100 sermons every year. Sunday morning, Sunday night. If I allowed 2 weeks vacation each year, then I'm looking at least 100. Now, if you work in gospel meetings and other things like that, then there would be more. But then you've got a subject already picked for you, or it's a little bit different. You can do the same thing in your writing process. Sit down and make a list of things you want to write about. Another thing that I would tell you from my ministry was I preached a lot of series, but I also wrote in series a lot. I might write a 12-part series in the bulletin, 12 weeks in a row on the organization of the church. Maybe you want to write a series of articles on what's necessary for salvation. A series of articles on one subject. You might pick baptism. You might pick some other subject that has to do with your ministry. How do you select these subjects is what we want to talk about. Even on those assignments that we're talking about where I or another instructor gives you an assignment, I want you to write an article on, I know one article that you will write on the role of women that's coming up later in your time here at Bear Valley. It'll be in your second year. But those assignments are going to be worded differently. They may be more or less specific, these different assignments. So you really need to learn how to select your subject. First, and this is one of the most important parts, select a subject you know or can learn about. That's the research part of research papers. So select a subject that you know or you can learn about in your research. Second, select a subject that you can restrict. Don't make your subject too broad to be adequately covered in your writing project. If I give you an assignment to write an essay, and I want you to write, I'm going to say 500 words, because most bulletin articles and bulletin sizes and the space that you will have in a bulletin are going to be around 500 words if you're typing in a Times New Roman 12-point font. You can manipulate that a little bit. You can get a few more words in if you drop it to a Times New Roman 11-point font. Here, this is where design comes in. What does it look like? If your font is so tiny that people can't read it, you got to get your pair of readers to read that. What did we say about readers? And they're lazy, and a lot of the readers in the congregation where you serve are going to be lazy, and if you make them have to work too hard to read your bulletin article, they're not going to read it. And so 500 words is a good round estimation of what you will need. Let's say that I assign you an essay of 500 words. You don't want to choose a subject that will take you 1,000 words to get through, even on a very basic level. You really want to understand those limitations. And so choose a subject that you can restrict to what you have. When it comes to writing blogs, I used to write a blog several years ago. In fact, I started this blog before there was such a thing as a blog. I had a very dear friend of mine sent me an email one day, and she and I had known each other for years and years. Her family moved to the area where I lived, and they came to our congregation when I was a really small, a little kid. She was a bigger kid, so I tell people she was one of the big kids at church when I was one of the little kids at church. But we've become very good friends over the years. We've done mission work together. Our families get together when we can, and it's a great relationship. But she was going through a rough time in the congregation where she was at the time, and so she wrote me an email and asked me some questions, and I thought, here's a great opportunity to just, and this is exactly how this began. I thought to myself, I want to write an encouraging word to a friend who, it seemed to me, needed encouragement. And so I wrote what turned out to be an article. I couldn't tell you how many words it was, but I wrote it out in an email. And I didn't write it out on a separate piece of paper and transfer it to an email. I actually hit reply and started working on it. And when I got to the end of that article, that encouraging note that I wrote, it occurred to me, this is email. I can send this same email to 100 people as easily as I can to one. And so I sat down and I didn't sit down, I was already sitting down. I went through my address book on my computer, email address book, and I picked out pretty close to 100. I can't remember how many I started with. It did grow, but it was pretty close to 100. And I put all of those addresses in and hit send. And I started hearing feedback from this. People saying they appreciated what I had to say. I didn't get it from everybody. And I don't know that everybody even appreciated getting it. But a number of people did. And so I had another idea associated with that. Why don't I do this every week? Every Monday morning, I can be in my office down at the church building, and I can write another article. It doesn't take much to write one of these articles, I didn't think. And so I just started doing that on a weekly basis. And after several weeks, maybe 2 or 3 months went by, I started getting responses back. I had been getting them all along about people appreciating it, whatever, asking questions about things or whatever the response was. But then someone said, I loved this so much that I resent it to everyone in my directory, in my email mailing list. Wow. So I'm actually sending an encouraging note to people I don't even know. And do you know that before a year went by, I did this for, I don't remember how many years I did this. Every week, I began getting responses back from all over the world because it is the World Wide Web. And so keep those things in mind. Here's what I wanted to say about blogs. Kind of chased a rabbit there for a little bit. Keep your blog, and I eventually learned this lesson, and I started restricting my notes of encouragement. I called them Barnabas notes, by the way, but I started restricting them to 200 words because one of the things that I discovered is most people, lazy readers, most people won't read past 200 words. In fact, if they see that it's longer than 200 words, they won't read the first 2 words. If you like to post things on, say, Facebook or social media, one thing you can keep in mind, and I'm this way. If I see a post and I see your name on it, I'm going to look at that post. But the first thing I look at before I start reading the post is whether or not down at the bottom of that post, and you've only got about that much space, and there's an in bold. There are 2 words: see more. All right, I will click on that, and if the more makes it, instead of this big, it's this big, I'll probably read it. But if it goes off my screen, I keep scrolling. I'm not going to read it. And that's the way most people are. Just keep that in mind. So if you want to write a blog, keep it to 200 words. And you can do that. You write what you want to say. This takes editing. And sometimes it's hard to edit material out. It's really hard when somebody else edits it. I know that. I'm an editor. And so sometimes people don't like it when I have to make things fit. But you can go through your material and you can find words that you can replace. You can find phrases you can replace with shorter phrases. You can delete some words, and you can get it to 200 as long as you start within, you're not having to take out 50 or 100 words. That makes it a little bit harder. Just don't write it like that. So it's very important that you learn to restrict your project. And then finally, as you consider your possible topics, ask yourself 3 questions. And these are 3 very important questions for writers. Is it significant? Is it significant? Does it mean something? Is it important that this get out? Now, I happen to think that if you're writing a series of bulletin articles in a congregation that you've just moved to, you don't really know the history of that congregation, it's probably a good idea that once in a while you address some very basic doctrinal issues like the organization of the church. That's significant. How a person is saved, that's significant. We are living in a world that is controlled almost exclusively by postmodernism. How that affects people, how that affects the people in your congregation is critical. Never mind significant, it's critical. But you need to ask yourself this question about your writing project. Is it significant? If it's not, choose a different project, a different subject, or make it significant. Second question, is it interesting? What we've already said about lazy readers. Is it interesting? If it's not interesting, it doesn't make any difference how significant it is. Nobody's going to read it. So is it interesting? And third, is it manageable? can I manage this subject adequately in the time and the space that I have? If you are asked to write a scholarly article in a Brotherhood publication or some other publication, a newspaper, for example, you're going to have some limitations placed upon you. You're going to have a deadline, so time limitation, and you're going to have a space limitation. It's got to be so many words. I remember writing a full page article that a number of congregations went together to pay for. But even with a full page newspaper article, and I got to tell you, that was an exciting thing to write because I didn't have the usual space limitations like 500 words or 200 words. I don't remember how many words it was, but it was a full page article. And newspapers can work a little bit with font just like you can in a bulletin if you're printing your own bulletins. But even so, you can't put a whole encyclopedia, you can't put the whole Bible on one page and so people can read it. So there are some limitations. Is it manageable? So is it significant? Is it interesting? Is it manageable? Those three questions are absolutely key to being able to complete a writing project. All right, I want to stop here and pick this back up in volume 2 of this particular video series. Then we're still going to be talking about the writing process in volume 2, but we're going to stop here for now. Thank you very much.